Most people don't lose awareness in meditation. They lose it in conversations, in traffic, in conflict, right? In criticism. All it takes is one tone, one side glance, or we call it the stink eye, Michael. One look, one bad memory, and suddenly they're gone, right? They're reacting, they're defending, they're shutting down, or exploding in some cases. That is not choice. We're all about choice here lately on this season of the New Ashla Podcast. That's more like conditioning. So today we're talking about how emotional patterns quietly hijack our consciousness and how we can reclaim presence in real life. I'm Justin Gates. Joining me today is Michael Perry, and you're listening to the New Ashla Podcast. Hello and welcome to the New Ashla Podcast, home of everything awesome. Only awesome, Michael.
Only awesome.
Only awesome. So today we're going to be talking about how emotional patterns hijack our consciousness. I thought this was going to be a really important topic for us to talk about right out of the gate in this new season, because we want to kind of frame how we can start making choices instead of reacting to everything. How these emotional reactions are learned, right? How these patterns activates before we even have a chance to choose consciously.
And how they could be running your life.
And how they do run our lives, right?
Yeah.
A lot. So these emotional patterns are learned responses, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. I know a few people that I grew up with that I've witnessed this pattern, and it's definitely a behavior that was taught early, that got their needs met early.
Right. It was a way for them to protect themselves early, right? But these emotional patterns override our awareness, which as we've discussed many times is important. But really they hijack our presence, which is probably the most detrimental thing they do, because we really want to be present in our lives. We don't want to be just kind of controlled from inside, puppeted by our own reactions, right? We want to learn to choose. We want to learn to be present. So this will make us say things we don't mean. I've been there. I've been there so many times, right? I know you have, and probably all of us have, right? Or when we truly want connection, but we withdraw instead because that feels better. Or we fight when we really want peace. Or we freeze when we want to be brave. And then we do what afterwards? We think. We think and we think.
The rumination begins. The guilt sets in.
Yep. And that's where that's what happens when our consciousness collapses under emotion, right? So today we're talking about how that happens, how these patterns quietly take over our inner life, and how we can reclaim those. So what is emotional hijacking? What is that?
Emotional hijacking is where, in scientific terms, pretty much our amygdala flares up, our frontal cortex, which is where all our rational thinking is. That amygdala swells up and our frontal cortex shuts down. Our ability to be logical, to be introspective, our ability to evaluate a situation outside of ourselves goes away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talk about outbursts, and it's just like the emotions override. I need safety now. I need to not feel judged. I need to not feel controlled. I need to not feel like I'm a problem.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of us out here believe strongly too that our emotional reactions simply just happen, right? And we'll hear them say things like, I just got angry, or I just shut down, or I just felt overwhelmed. As if these things just appeared out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
How random is this emotional hijacking?
It's not random at all.
Yeah.
At all.
At all. Yeah. Yeah. And it's this activation of these learned responses that take over our awareness. We don't give ourselves time to pause and fill in that space between the event and the reaction, right? Something we talk about a lot, but it's worth repeating as many times as we need to, right? So, think of it like an old pathway in our nervous systems that just are the default setting, right? They just light up when stuff happens. And it's not that we consciously want to step aside, and we don't want to stop that and try to be better. It just, our consciousness doesn't have time to step in because we haven't given ourselves the ability to do that, right? Even though we all can do that, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say it's like this can be resonating with you, whether you fight, flight, freeze, or whatever your response is. But it is something that has to be trained, and it takes multiple times of learning to pause, learning to bring your mind back online, learning to not let the emotions take the steering wheel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they happen faster than you can think, faster than you can reflect, faster than you can choose, faster than even a conscious thought, right? We get a feeling, and suddenly we are inside of it, and it has become us. And we're speaking from it. We're defending from it, right? And it feels normal, doesn't it?
Yeah. Once you're in that zone, especially depending on what your response is, especially when it comes to fawn and fight, the big issues with these two coping mechanisms is they get your needs met. People who tend to anger, they learned at an early age. If I just react, if I become overly angry, I'm going to get my needs met.
Right.
And then same with fawning. If I just please everyone at the sacrifice of myself, I'll have my needs met. I won't have conflict.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, these strategies were formed through real things, real experiences that have happened, right? And again, like we say a lot of times, these are just things that have happened to us over time when we didn't feel safe, or we didn't feel seen, right? Or just completely overwhelmed all the time, or powerless. Powerless is a big one. And that one transforms people into something sometimes really, really detrimental, dangerous. So, but again, it's just our inner selves trying to adapt, to protect, right? So, and like we always say, these things were useful once. Of course they were. They got us here. They helped us get to this, from point A to point B to point C, right? And it's not the things that happened to us when we were 6, because now we're much older than that, and now we must learn to take control of that.
Yeah.
And find a better way to survive.
I mean, I think one of the biggest things too is removing the identity from it. That's one of the first big steps. Because I think a lot of people, I know myself included, I used to be such a people pleaser, and I'm still working my way out of that system. But it used to be, I'm just a nice guy. I'm just really good. I like to be there for people. So what if it hurts me a little bit? I think it's the best way to be. Same with the anger. I'm just a bad bitch.
Right. Right. Because those things are what you need to be, and you're doing what you know. But there's always a better way, right? Especially as we get older, as we have more autonomy over ourselves. When we're little, we don't have a lot, right? We depend on people to do these things for us because we simply don't have the means to do things. But now that we do, it's time to, right, get to work. But this is why these learned patterns bypass reflection, and they don't consult wisdom, right? And they can't. I won't say that they don't wait for clarity. They really can't wait for clarity because it just happens so fast and it's so automatic. And, again, when we're much younger, much smaller, much less capable, our consciousness is very much underdeveloped, right? It's not our fault. It's nothing we can really do about that because consciousness is developed over time, right? Well, where that consciousness is underdeveloped or weak, something has to fill that space. And for most of us, it's usually emotion, right?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of these responses, it's our system going into overdrive for immediate resolution. Whether that's to shut other people down or to remove the ambiguity of an awkward moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there's lots of those.
Yeah.
God, my mind just floods back to so many. especially, during our adolescence times where our body's changing and everything's changing. And like now I don't get embarrassed. Like, right. I can't remember the last time I was embarrassed about something because I actually don't give a, what people think about what I'm doing or how I dress but there was a time, right? There was a time where all those things were really important and they were all really embarrassing. Think about to your most embarrassing moments, and they usually came during that time. And there really isn't a lot of good places to go or good sources to learn how to navigate that. I think we all just kind of get put in a boat and we just float around until we're adults. Right?
Some get to the other shore quicker than others, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's what it feels like because you kind of feel like you're just at the mercy of everything, right? And despite their best efforts, the people around us may be trying to help us through it, but I didn't listen very well as a teenager. I barely listen now as an adult, but especially back then, right? I didn't listen as a teenager, and it didn't matter what anybody told me or whatever. I was going to go through it, and I was going to float around until I bumped into land somewhere. But we're talking about these emotional patterns, but I want to make something very clear, as we always do. Emotion is not the problem. Emotions are energy, right?
Yeah.
They rise and they fall, and they move and they flow, but they pass. The issue here is what? Governance, right?
Yeah. That's the perfect word for it.
Right.
Again, not letting emotion take the steering wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning to steer our ships. Because awareness provides the direction, and presence provides the boundaries that we can contain our emotions in, right? But without awareness, emotions run wild. But with awareness and time and practice, emotion becomes a teacher, a messenger. So that's really the difference between being ruled by a feeling and being guided by consciousness, right? So where do these patterns come from? We talked a little bit about where these things most likely start for most of us. Are there any other places that these things come from?
As much as for many cases it comes from childhood, it could come from adulthood. You get in a bad relationship for a long period of time, or even a short period of time. Certain abuse systems that happen, whether emotional, verbal, psychological. I mean, things can warp our reality. Yeah, stuff we do to ourselves.
Yeah.
We go through a string of horrible mishaps and poor circumstances. And we start to blame ourselves because we start equating ourselves as the root problem.
Right.
But in many cases, it does stem from childhood. I think about the example of the elephant tied to the table. You look at circus elephants, and why don't they just tantrum away and run off? They got the strength for it.
Yeah, they could just trample everybody. Yeah. They could just, like, I'm out of here. They could.
Seriously.
I never really thought about it. How come they don't, right?
Yeah, and it's because when they're young, they have a rope tied to their ankle to a table or a tree, and they learn at a very young age they cannot move that table or that tree or whatever it is they're tied to.
Right.
And as they get older, they have this belief system, this part of them that tells them, I can't do that. Mm-hmm. I am incapable of this.
Right.
And it can apply to all of this: the freeze response, the fight response, the fawn response.
This is why no one should feel ashamed about this, because none of this was choice, right? None of this was choice at all. But what happens when we do these things over time? They become habits, right? And then habits become identities. And then we start saying, it's just who I am.
Yep.
I am what I am. Just, right?
That's such a dangerous game to play, too, because
it is.
The more you do that, the more you ingrain. I think of neural pathways, and it's just the more you dig it into that pathway, and the harder it's going to be to start leveling out, which, mind you, no matter how far you are down this, there is hope. But it is a very real thing. I know I struggled with it.
Right.
I'm years into this and still cultivating that resilience to stand my own and put myself first.
Well, if you're not careful, they become invisible. The patterns do.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it's kind of weird, because as you start doing this work to start identifying these things again, it's almost like you're meeting them for the first time again. You're like, you almost feel like you forgot that they even exist. Yeah. Right? And you're like, wait a minute. It's almost like deja vu.
Yeah.
You're like, this feels really familiar all of a sudden. Well, because we let them become invisible because we identified with the habits and they became habits and we identified with them and we stopped seeing them as patterns and started experiencing them as more like natural reactions, right? And this is how
Yeah.
that conditioning hides in plain sight, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it's like they talk about how the lotus only blooms in muddy water. And that whole quote stems around, I guarantee you, a vast majority of our listeners are people who are healing from something or a lot of things really traumatic. Because it's not until life brings us to our knees and we're forced to look in the mirror, the real mirror, do we all of a sudden realize that life has been built around a whole bunch of safety systems and not authenticity.
Right. And it's important to point out here that these patterns are not just stored in our memories that we somehow push so far down that we almost forget. Where else are these things stored?
Stored in our nervous system. That's probably the biggest place.
The body.
Because our nervous system is
Right.
what controls that mind.
Right.
The minute our bodies get activated, the minute we feel that tightness in our chest,
Yep.
we feel our blood pressure go up. That is the
Yeah.
minute our minds go with the tide.
Right. Yeah, because we can trick our mind into forgetting, but the body always remembers, right? We say that a lot. The body always remembers.
Body keeps the score.
The
Yep.
body keeps the score, which is a book you should read if you haven't read that. It's a really good one.
Trigger warning.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Yeah, because it's almost like when you read or listen to that book, you're in for a rough ride. But it's good for you. Just like the Four Agreements. I've listened to that book probably over 100 times now. I love that book so much because it's quick, it's short, but it's powerful, right?
It's dense
But
in a good way.
But when so many people, and I've had so many people I've loaned that book to, the physical copy, or turned them on to it, it breaks them in half, and it's just so weird to me. But I didn't come at that book from that place. I was already kind of far along the way once I found that book. But like it's a flip of the coin. Depending on who I give that book to, it breaks them. And then they have to go back to it several times to kind of build that resiliency. But yeah, that book will do the same thing to you. But it's good for you. I know I know it's hard to say, do this, it's going to hurt, but it's good for you. I don't like saying that, but it is the truth. I don't know how else to say that.
It was the second book you ever recommended me.
Yep. But look, here's where insight is good for us. And later we're going to talk about how to integrate, right? But the insight here is this: understanding this, what we're saying, it removes the shame of it, right? You didn't choose these things. You certainly didn't do it consciously because none of us would have, right? I don't think any of us would have chosen this had we known that in 15 or 20 years it would mess us up. I don't think anybody would choose that.
Yeah.
Likewise, our families, our parents, or whoever, they wouldn't have chose this for us either. I think that's fair to say, right? So understand that this is, we're not blaming. These are things that you probably inherited and you learned. But here's where responsibility, Michael, begins. It begins when awareness arrives, right? Now we know. We have our insight. Now we're going to start working on how to integrate that, right? Because this stuff that's unconscious can be retrained. The human mind and the human body and the human consciousness and soul, the human being is such a beautiful creature. We're never stuck, right? We're never stuck in one modality. We can move. We can retrain. We can relearn. We can move beyond things, right? We do it every single day. So these things that have become automatic can become intentional. Wouldn't you say? You're not condemned by your history, are you, Michael?
Not at all. Might tell you how tall your mountain is to climb, but that mountain is climbable.
It is. We're not condemned by our history. We're shaped by it until we become conscious of it. And that's where insight starts this process. Let's talk quickly about that moment when consciousness does get hijacked, right? This is where we're going to start to practice recognizing that thing that triggers us or creates the reaction and then goes into the story, or like when the past enters the present and we start to ruminate
Yep.
about the past or be anxious about the future, where we
Or
start, huh?
I think more than not, it's projection. It's often
Yeah,
projecting the past on the current moment.
right, right, right. Oh yeah, yeah. I think we're probably saying the same thing. You just say it a little better. But this emotional hijacking doesn't always begin with an explosion. It just these little small little things, right? These little small shifts that most of us miss because we're not paying attention. Again, I could say a comment to you that triggers you. I may not even have any idea that it's going to trigger you, but you allow it to trigger you, right? Or I change my tone, or I look at you kind of funny, right? Like, really? Like if you said something and I said, what? Right? I didn't have to say anything, but I look and then you're going to be like, oh shit, what was that? What was that look for, right?
Now I
Um,
know people that even looks are enough to trigger that thing. You're judging me right now, and it's like,
right.
no,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm
That's a good one.
confused by what you're doing, but this isn't judgment. Like you do you,
Right.
but
That's kind of the first wave. But if awareness is present, you can say, okay, here comes a wave. Time to ground, time to pause,
yeah,
right? Because if that awareness is absent, that wave becomes a really nasty current that carries you out to sea. And nobody can swim in the sea. I don't care who they are. It doesn't swim for long, right?
Well, I think even then, like, if you take anything away from this episode, it is to pause when this happens.
Mm-hmm.
Pausing is the most powerful superpower you can cultivate because with the pause, can you bring yourself back to reality and not get thrust into the chaos that is your emotional home?
Right. Because after that first thing, whatever it is that creates a reaction, our body goes into, it mobilizes, right? It goes into defense mode, right? And
Fight
then
or
the mind
flight.
comes behind, right? The body hits first. The mind goes, oh crap, the body's in a fight. The body's got something going on. Let's go. And then it'll build a story. It'll say, oh, this is
Yeah.
what's really happening. This is why it's happening, or whatever. And
This
it
is
will,
what they think of me. They're
right.
judging me right now.
It will assign blame, usually on itself, which really sucks, right? And then it'll start predicting outcomes, like you said. It'll predict the outcomes and it'll say, oh, you're just judging me, or whatever. Whatever it's predicting, it's usually not true, by the way. And then it'll justify the response instead of well, and then that story that you make becomes your new identity for the moment. I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm being disrespected. And guess what? You're no longer present, are you? The past has entered the chat.
Yeah. One of my favorite things I heard a long time ago was that when we're triggered, we regress to the emotional age that emotion is stuck. And I think about the times where my freeze/fight kicks in when conflict arises and I did something wrong and people are coming at me and I shut down. I feel myself go into, I can't do anything right. I can't argue this because I'll probably be in the wrong. Who is that? Is that an adult saying that? Or is it a 10-year-old child who doesn't know how to stand up to his parents when he's in the wrong, you know? Just as an example.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, you're no longer in the present now. The past has entered the moment, and now we are interpreting a current reality with a past thing. You're actually really responding to history, not what is actually happening in front of you. And that feels very justified, and it feels right. And it really feels necessary, doesn't it? Because when you're inside that pattern, it always does. It always feels right. It always feels necessary. It always feels justified. I'm doing exactly what I need to do. Yet everything keeps turning out a way that's not good for us. Because and this is why it's difficult to see in the moment, because it feels like truth. But is it truth?
No. But it definitely feels like it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a reality that you have to snap yourself out of, because that story you're telling yourself, you're pretending like you're reading an actual book when you're just making things up in your head.
Yeah.
It's a hard separation. It takes practice.
But when you learn to catch it, you now have given yourself space for choice, haven't you? Choice is one of the most powerful things we have at our disposal.
When so many people underrate what that really means, we got to hammer this in real quick
Yeah.
because
No,
it's so vital.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, It's like when we get angry, we have the choice to not react, but instead to understand what is actually being said. It's we withdraw. We have we have a choice to see things for what they are and not a perceived attack. When we decide to choose to think differently in those moments, because that's what it is.
Yeah. And sometimes we need to be angry.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes all these emotions and feelings we have are the right thing to do, but we got to make sure that we are driving that. We are choosing that, right? Because sometimes anger is a good thing to express, because sometimes you need to be angry, right?
Discernment is key.
Discernment is key. So when emotion becomes identity, and this is probably one of the worst places to get stuck in, because we start identifying with these things instead of seeing the reactions as either temporary states or reactions or responses, I should say, that you chose. We start to define ourselves by the automatic things. I'm just an anxious person, or I'm naturally angry. I'm sensitive, or whatever things they want to say, right?
I'm just a firecracker.
I'm just a firecracker. Now, these things sound honest, and sometimes they might be, but they're often declarations of surrender. Surrendering control. Not surrendering to, but surrendering control of these things that we must be in charge of, right?
Well, God, the one thing that breaks my heart, because I see so many people go through this, is it's so lonely when you let your emotions dictate your reality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with people who are angry, you push people away with that. When you got people who are over people pleasing, you attract the people who take advantage of you instead of the people who are going to uplift you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most dangerous part of identifying with it, is you create your own reality with that.
Well, another really dangerous part of it is that we stop questioning things. We stop being curious.
Well said.
We just defend things just because. We just justify things because it's happening. We're just letting it happen, and we're just going to, write it out no matter what happens to us afterwards. And usually it brings up these same old things that keep haunting us in our lives. The relationships that go wrong, or can't hold a job or can't do any of these things that because of we can't take control of ourselves. Right. And then
it's easier than facing our demons.
It is. And we'll justify that. And then we will make everything feel like a personal attack. How stable is mood-based identity? Is that a good way to steer your ship?
No, I mean, I think about it again, like when you have the angry person, people learn to walk around eggshells from you. And it might seem peaceful on the outside. People know to stay in their lane. People don't try to come at me. But in the end, people end up going behind your back. People won't come to you about important things. People will keep you at arm's length. And then when you have people who are passive, you end up being gullible and over trusting to people who may be manipulating you. You may put yourself to blame when you're not at blame, which leads to so much shame and self-loathing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not stable at all. Not a good way to captain your ship, right? Because when you identify yourself through these emotional states, you're really attaching yourself to whatever circumstance happens. It's going to rise and fall, right? So like you're confident when things feel good, but you're absolutely lost when they're not. And then that inner authority, which you've been given sovereignty over, remember, you have one human soul that you were supposed to take care of.
Yep. That
inner authority becomes dependent on outside conditions.
Oh my God, that's such a good point, because that is the point of this. I often reflect on inner locus of control and outer locus of control. Mm-hmm. All of these survival mechanisms are all based around an outer locus of control.
Right.
Everything outside of me has to be okay. People have to perceive me a certain way.
Right.
I have to make sure people treat me a certain way. I have to make sure that no one undermines me. I have to. It's all these things we build around us that we're trying to manage outside of ourselves, instead of giving ourselves the ability to say, I am a flawed human being, and that's okay.
All these things that you literally have zero control over. I can't control what anyone else does. Right?
Yeah. But God, do we try?
But we do try. But we do base a lot of things around stuff outside of us. And when you get to a certain point, you'll start to think that sounds crazy. But we all do it. We all do it. But it does sound crazy.
I'm sure you have moments where someone catches you at the right moment, says the right thing, and you don't quite get that moment to say, pause.
Nope. We were just talking about one such thing that we will not talk about on the air. That literally did that, right? None of us are safe from ourselves sometimes.
Yep.
Here's the truth, though. And the truth is much simpler than all of this stuff, but much more powerful, too. You, Michael, experience emotions. I don't know if you know that. You experience emotions, but you are not emotions, right? You feel anger. You're not anger, though. Do you feel fear?
Yeah.
Are you fear, though?
No.
You get the point, right? We all feel sadness, but we're not sadness. Emotions are messengers. You can even think of emotions as visitors to your inner temple. They come and they go, right? But they come with messages. They bring information. Then they leave.
And I will say, when these messengers come, especially if it triggers you, that message often is telling you more about yourself than what's going on outside around you.
Right. But when you confuse the visitor with the temple, the inner temple, that's when everything becomes crazy and chaotic. We have to separate ourselves from reaction. That's not a denial of our sovereignty. It's not a denial of our individuality. It's clarity, right? It's what allows us to hear the messages, to experience the emotion without being ruled by it, right? Why would you say that awareness disappears under pressure?
Again, when we get triggered, when those emotions flare up, our logical mind vanishes. And when our logical mind vanishes, that's why emotion can so easily jump in the driver's seat and start controlling the car, because all of a sudden you're no longer there. That seat is vacant.
And this happens to those of us who have done this work for many years, right? Because once we find that magical key of awareness and unlock that magical door to all this awesome stuff, sometimes we get stuck in this idea that, well, once I get it, it should now be the automatic response, that it will automatically remain present in every moment of my life, right? So we think that once we understand consciousness, once we learn how to practice it, once we learn how to grow it and get to this place on the other, sometimes literally on the other side of pain, right? That we should be able to just stay centered at all times. Is that really how this works?
No. Even the greatest gurus out there have moments where they gotta pause.
Oh, yeah. Big pause, or they get paused, right?
Yeah.
And so this kind of stuff isn't just for people who are trying to find the beginnings of the path to healing. This show is for everyone. Literally everyone. Right? I just went through this the other day. And man, I did find my pause, but boy, did I want to just let it rip, right? Because even though I understand this to a point where I can teach it, I still can't just assume that it's going to be automatic, just like the other stuff, right?
Well, I'll even add, these emotions can be addicting. And I know that sounds weird, but it's the minute we get flared up, what we want more than anything is to fight these emotions away, to calm them. We want to run away from these emotions. We want to freeze and just vanish out of the world. And we crave that comforting that. We crave the comfort that these responses have.
Right.
That's why we do it.
Especially if people around us react to our outburst or react to our whatever we do, right? That just encourages us to keep doing that stuff too, right? If you're around people who are like, oh man, I love it when he loses his mind. I love it when he flips out. We all have people like that. Or man, it's hilarious. Dude, it's hilarious. Or like you'll have an outburst and you're really not trying to be funny, but people find it funny. And then you're starting to train yourself in the wrong way. But presence under pressure is not automatic. It is trained, right? Because the other stuff was trained too over time. So,
Yeah. And one thing I want to add to this too is it's like we train this, it's a muscle, right? We build it nice and strong. But if we decide to put that weight down, we go through a really nice spell, we need to always be mindful. We need to always be aware. Because if we're not exercising it, it's so easy for it to just that muscle to atrophy and it get right back to doing what it was doing. Right? So those neural pathways are deep.
Atrophy affects every part of our being. Mind, body, heart, and spirit. Every single part. We must pay attention. We must pay attention to these things and try to train them all regularly, right? But really, this stuff is why we can't, stability can't, and being centered and at peace, all this stuff cannot be assumed. We must continue to cultivate it. Like you said, just like our muscles need to train and train and train, right? We need to train ourselves emotionally, spiritually, mentally. So, and the best way that I've found is through repetition and through learning patience and through discipline, right? Because it's really easy to be calm and present when things are easy. When things get difficult, which they do for all of us, there's never an easy way. No matter how far you go, no matter how ascended you get, presence in those difficult moments is really self-mastery. They're never going to stop being hard. But they do get a little easier, right? Once you practice this more and more. So speaking of disciplines, let's talk about how we can train our presence inside emotion, right? So learning to remain present inside these strong emotions, these strong surges, right, is one of the most central disciplines to self-mastery. We have to have it. We have to have this in order to develop self-mastery. Because really, most people only have two options, right, when emotions become intense. They either get flooded and lose control, or they avoid it through distraction or argument or withdrawal or whatever it is. Or compulsive behavior is one I see a lot.
Yeah.
Both of these, though, are forms of unconsciousness, aren't they?
Well, I think all of this is rooted in unconsciousness. I mean, again, 95% of our thoughts come from the unconscious mind. We think all our thoughts, but in the end, there is something writing the narrative that we see. And it is based on things from our past. It is based on unconscious beliefs. It is built on these systems and agreements we didn't realize we made.
Yeah. And of course, now we're going to start to talk about integration. We have all this insight, Michael. Now let's get to the points now where we're going to start to integrate this. The very first thing is us learning to stay with the feeling, the sensation, right?
Sit down, not try to feed it, but just to sit with it, to allow it to exist without judgment and without trying to soothe it.
And without letting it become a story, right? So learning to stay with it before we turn it into a story. It is physical. And depending on who you are, tightness in the chest, your face gets flushed. We all know guys that get super red. I used to work for this guy named, what the hell was his name? Gary. I used to work for this guy named Gary. And you could tell, dude, this guy must have had the worst blood pressure on earth, because whenever he got mad, dude, the red in your chair, his face would get that red. Dude, you could feel the heat coming off that dude, right? So, but we have these different. We all kind of experience emotions, especially when they're surging, when they're kind of overtaking us, different ways in our body. But when you can notice those and still remain present, you already are starting to interrupt that pattern, aren't you?
Because when you can do that, you can, again, your front mind starts to turn off, your logical thinking. If you can stop it before it hijacks you, you can allow yourself that window to slowly allow those circuits to start turning back on, to start functioning, to allow yourself to be present.
Breathing's got to be the first thing, right? Breathing through it, slow, steady breath sends good signals to your nervous system, to your body, right? It helps prevent that escalation. It helps your face stay the regular color and not fire engine red. and burning holes in paper when that's near you, right? Because it keeps your awareness anchored in your body. But we're not doing this forcefully. We're allowing the regulation to start happening naturally through breathing, which brings what? Presence, right?
Well, and I mean, breathing, it naturally is meant to calm your nervous system. You ever notice how your body feels so energized and active after you do a run or something very physically active, and you're panting because you're getting all that air into your lungs? Your body's naturally doing it. And when you're angry, you're doing the same thing. You start getting really huffy. So the minute you catch that, deep breaths in. We went over the breathing exercises in the last episode. Pursed lip breathing, breathing out through your lips slowly. It'll regulate your nervous system. It'll calm it down.
That was a great episode, by the way. You guys did great on that one.
Yeah, that was a great interview.
So the next step would be to widening our awareness. And instead of focusing only on the feeling and ruminating like in real time, we start to expand the whole field of the experience. Start to look at the room, start to hear sounds, feel your posture, your breath, your surroundings. This expansion creates space for us, right? The emotion is no longer everything. It just becomes one thing inside our awareness, right? And then the final discipline is simply refusing to collapse into a story, into a justification, into a judgment, whatever is going to follow for you. Because every time we have a strong emotion, it invites a narrative, right?
Yeah. Are you trying to communicate or are you just trying to defend yourself?
Right. This is how we start to learn how to feel without drowning in it. And how we learn to witness without running from it or hiding from it or suppressing it. And not acting as if it's us. Staying long enough. Staying present long enough for it to transform and move along. So let's talk about some daily practices that we can do for emotional mastery.
I got one that'll fast track your healing in this. It's something I have started doing thanks to therapy. All right? Exposure therapy. So, find someone you trust and have an argument with them. I mean, let them know ahead of time. Don't go picking fights.
Hey, pal.
But get yourself in an activated state with someone you trust. Learn to feel what it's like in your body and learn how to respond accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Same with freeze, getting to point, let someone you trust say some hurtful things. You're going to feel yourself start to shut down, bring yourself to baseline, and learn to conversate through it.
That's a good one. But really start off easy. Start off light.
Yeah, no, don't go to level 10. Like, work your way through. My therapist, my first one was like, all right, you need to pick a fight with your mom. That's like, all right. Which I have a great relationship with my mother. That one is one we've never fought, so it's one of those things, right? That's a very safe place to start.
Right. So, of course, the first discipline, the first thing we're going to practice, as always, is the pause, Michael. Right? The pause before reacting so that we can respond. When something sets you off, even a brief, tiny little pause can change everything, right? Even if it's enough time for just one breath or one still moment, 1 second of not smacking someone across the face. That pause creates space in between the thing and our reaction. Once we master the pause, then we get to create another space after so that we can reflect, right?
Yep.
Another practice that we talk about on this show a lot is naming things, right?
Yeah.
Calling it out.
Yeah, that's something I've actually been getting back in the habit of. It's like when I feel myself ruminating, when I see myself activated, it's like, what am I feeling in my body right now? Like, this is fear trying to speak to me. This is anger trying to speak to me. This is a past memory that's coming up in modern day where I'm feeling what I felt then.
Yeah.
The more you can conceptualize it, the less control it has.
All throughout human history, the thing to kill the monsters or the thing to stop the demons or whatever the thing is, right, is to name it. That's how we steal its power, right? That kind of follows around through all the mythology and all our beliefs and if we can name it, we can take its power over us. So that's why this is really, really powerful. Instead of just immediately trying to interpret what you feel, Notice it, whatever it is. Could be tightness in the chest, the red face, pressure in your stomach. Naming these things brings attention and takes us out of a narrative and back into reality, into that direct experience, right? What are some ways that we can ground? Because grounding is another good way to go.
You know, one of my favorites, tapping. Tap work. I am safe. Everything's okay. And I get you can't do that in the workplace, or if you're getting ready to get into a fist fight, you're not gonna be like, hold on one second, let me just get grounded first before.
Right. No, but you can feel your feet, or you can feel your weight, your body weight shifting. You can feel your posture. You can, if you're sitting, you can connect with feel the contact with the chair, the floor, or the ground, right? This simply just anchors our awareness in the present moment again, where we are, and it can help prevent these emotional spirals. So really, here's the whole point of this episode, and some of the things we've talked about already. We're going to get into our exercise and our other favorite things here in a little bit, but really the goal of this, and the goal when I teach it to you and to others, my goal is to help you develop that emotional sovereignty and that inner authority, right? And it's not built through control or dominance or force. The ability to remain present, clear, and grounded, regardless of what's happening, regardless of what's circumstance is giving us permission or pushing us to act a certain way, right? Because without that stability, we really have trouble being consistent. We just become reactive and inconsistent, right? We can't be driven by our moods. Now, sometimes we can't always control that, because we do have to talk about, I do have to say that sometimes our bodies go through changes. And if there's a lot of hormonal things going on within us, sometimes we just have to put ourselves in timeout, maybe, right? Or whatever, right? Whatever, because we can't, and we're not talking about how to control everything, because I'm not sure I know how, Michael, to control everything. And I'll be the first one to admit that. But when we're driven by our moods and our decisions are based on our emotional state, we have trouble communicating, we have trouble de-stressing, our boundaries will crack under pressure, right? And the people that love us the most and are around us, they get to a point where they don't even know which version of you they're going to get today.
Yeah.
That certainly doesn't help building the trust building, does it?
Not at all.
Right? So we got to move ourselves out of dependency emotionally when we're just relying on these external things to either regulate us or freak us out, right? How important is it to dictate our lives, Michael, based on someone else's approval, someone else's validations, someone else's agreement, right?
Most of us do it, but that is not the way to live a fulfilled life.
Right. Right. It's true. And these reactions that we have, they weaken our authority, both inside and outside. Because if you're signaling to yourself, and really to yourself mostly, but to others too, that you lack self-governance, when you're very easily provoked, or you're easily thrown off balance, destabilized, or overwhelmed, other people will sense that our inner world is in chaos. We're not anchored, right? So like even when and tell me if this has ever happened to you, but even when your words are correct and everything you do and say appears to be correct, but your presence still feels unstable, and that's what people are going to pick up on versus what is all the right things you're doing, right?
Our vibration speaks.
They do. They do. What happens when we suppress? We create pressure. What does that cause?
God, that bottles up the emotions even worse. That makes us a boiling pot. You know, depending on what your style is. If you keep repressing yourself for fawning, the fawning will get worse. Your needs will go more and more to the bottom. You know, if freeze is your thing, it's going to be a lot easier for you to lock up in non-stressful situations. Anger means you're going to be constantly defensive, constantly trying to fight, constantly ready to do anything to make sure no one crosses your boundaries.
Nope. Do you have anything you want to share before we get into the exercise and our favorite parts of the show?
Yeah. First off, as we said, this is a human thing. This is something that you learn to manage, not something that you overcome. That's just the truth of the nature. And when you look at these things, look at them with compassion. These are things that you have developed to keep you safe, to keep you in connection. But the truth, the thing that all these things keep you from is vulnerability. And vulnerability isn't bad. If you look at the things you can gain, if you learn to overcome enough to have your presence and not let these things define your actions. If anger is your thing, learning to be vulnerable is going to help you cultivate more meaningful relationships. It's going to help you have people who can support you better. If freeze is your thing, you get more agency in your life because you no longer allow people to dictate what's going on. With fleeing, you gain, what would you say this is? With fleeing, you gain more agency in your life in the sense that you are able to have more of a say in what is acceptable in your own needs.
Right.
And for Fani, you learn you can
in your authenticity. You get to stand up for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like all these things are survival mechanisms that are keeping you from the real gold in your life. We all walk around with masks, and until we realize we are and we pull them off, they're stopping us from having the most fulfilling parts of life. So I highly recommend anyone who's listening to start this work, to learn to do the pause, to learn to get back in your body when you're triggered, and above all, to learn that it's okay to not be human and no one's going to hate you for not being a perfect human being, that it's okay to be flawed.
And if they do, flick them off their ear. They are no good. If they do, they're no good.
The right people will stick around.
And they need to go through some kind of shadow work and healing, right?
That's all I got.
Presence over perfection. That's all human beings can do, truly, right? Show up. Don't perform, show up. So our practice today is going to be a very simple one. It's something that we probably do a lot throughout most of our shows, especially when we're talking about our emotional reactions. So the first thing we're going to do, Michael, is notice when we're set off, when we're triggered or set off, notice it. What is that? Okay, now I'm pissed, or now I'm sad, or now I'm scared, or whatever, right? Now, when you can notice it, now's the time to also not just notice the sensation or the reaction before it hits, right? Notice what's happening in the body. Notice where your breath is. Then call out the emotion. Call out what it is. Call it out. Call it by name. Steal its power over you, right? Don't analyze it. And do your best not to react. Try to pause and respond. Label it. You can call it feeling, or like you said, I'm getting angry, or you can even call it this is just a message, or I'm just feeling, and use these tactics to return back to awareness. That's the point, really. You don't have to do it exactly the way I've laid it out for you. It's the best way I could think of how to explain it, but do it in a way that returns you to awareness. That's really the point here. Return to awareness. Use the power of that pause. Then choose your response. And maybe you do get angry like the Hulk, and maybe that's justified. Like maybe that's really what you need in the moment now, but you have to choose it at least, right? And going back to something you said about kind of practicing feeling these things, these triggers with conversations or through arguments with someone you trust, you got to practice this stuff in real situations. That's the only time it really helps, right? And if you're able to give yourself that buffer at the end for the reflection, then you're going to kind of ask yourself things like, what is this message trying to tell me? What is this trying to teach me? Why does this keep coming up in these similar situations? Because it probably is trying to tell you something or teach you something, right? Anything to add to that?
No, that was beautiful.
Our affirmations for today. I remain present when emotion rises. I witness reactions without becoming them. My awareness is stronger than my patterns. I choose response over reaction every time. We're going to make that into a t-shirt. Response over reaction. I train consciousness in real life, in real time. Our journal prompts for today. What emotions hijack me most often? What situations trigger my automatic reactions? What does my body do when I'm activated? What story do I tell myself when I'm emotional? What would change in my life if I paused before reacting? So, these emotional patterns do not disappear simply through insight, as we've talked about many times, right, Michael? They start to loosen their grip on us through our practice of awareness. Every time you notice a reaction, instead of becoming it, or telling stories about it, or justifying it, every time you can do that, just simply noticing it, you reclaim your authority, right? And every time you pause, instead of exploding or hiding or running or whatever it is you're going to do, you strengthen your consciousness. You start to be in charge of yourself. You start to activate the front part and not just relying on what's happening back here all the time. None of us are meant to be ruled by the past. And really, if we think about it, none of us really want to be ruled by the past or that old conditioning, right? You were meant to govern your interworld with clarity and with integrity. So this week, just practice noticing that first thing, that first wave, the first tightening, the first story, or that first urge to react. Try to just find one. Start with one. Pause. Breathe. Right? Use that exercise in real moments as often as you can. Not perfectly, but consistently. So if this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who's ready to move beyond reaction and into self-mastery. Right, Michael? We know lots of people that can... sometimes I'll listen. I'll come back and listen to myself saying it, because sometimes I need a reminder.
Yep, I do the same thing.
And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe so you can continue walking this path with us and keep helping us along and sharing.
Yeah, help support the channel.
I just want to say before I go, presence is not just a concept that we say. It's a discipline, right? Wouldn't you say? It's something that we have to train and live with. And I promise you, as you do this more and more, watch what changes in your life. See what moves so that you can grow. That's all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining us. Check out all our socials. Check out the TikToks and the YouTubes and the Spotifys, the Apple, everywhere. Right, Michael? Everywhere.
Yes, sir.
Pretty much everywhere at this point. Someone did ask me a question. They said, how come I can't watch the videos on Apple? Well, because Apple doesn't support the video, right? So really, you can only watch the videos on Spotify, unfortunately. But everywhere else podcasts are hosted, you'll have the audio version of this. So I don't know if they ever fix that or how they would fix that. That's way above my pay grade, Michael.
Yes, indeed.
So, and also check out the greatest website ever created,
newashla.com.
We love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. With love and gratitude, ad lucem.
Ad lucem.